The late Republican senator from Arizona, John McCain, was recently eulogized by former presidents who he, at times, had staunch disagreements with. McCain was known for having the ability to work with both sides of the aisle to usher in reforms to campaign finance, immigration, and more. Sid Starks, a first Hampden and Hampshire District Republican Committee leader, and Democrat and Professor Jerold Duquette of Central Connecticut State University, examined McCain's legacy recently with Carrie Saldo.
Senator McCain's passing and funeral were such a big deal because during the last 6 months of his life, he was still very active. He was still making a lot of statements. He was still a player. He was still a part of the conversation. And his part of the conversation was particularly important because he was a staunch Republican, but who was a very staunch anti-Trump Republican. And while his fellows were sort of falling in line behind their president, he wasn't. And obviously that alone, before his passing, made his part of the conversation more interesting.
Sid, why do you think so many Americans were captivated by Senator McCain?
Well, he's been around so long. He was a war hero. You know, as far as the anti-Trump, he did work with Trump on a few issues, so they did work together. But he had the courage to say, if I don't agree with you, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, he would stand his ground. I think one of the things during the eulogies was, you know, his humanity. He cared about people more than he did his job.
Do you think that in the political environment of the current day, as you just said, he wasn't afraid to stand up and vote against the party or speak his mind very candidly? Is it more difficult to do that because of all the criticism, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, that a politician might be subject to, or is it kind of the same as always, but we have more access to it?
Well, Senator McCain is a politician of a different era. John McCain came into politics in the early 80s, and the people that he admired were middle 20th century politicians. And to them, partisanship wasn't a swear word or an ignoble thing, right? He's a guy who believed in old-time partisan politics, which meant rational deal-making, not insane combat, right? And so it's not so much that he was taking these stands against his party. It's almost, this might be cliche, but it's almost as if his party was taking stands against itself, and he was standing there saying, no, that's not how this stuff works. In other words, he was a guy who was a Republican, and he was a conservative, and he was a consistent conservative, but he was a person who understood that he represented the people of Arizona, and sometimes the people of Arizona wanted something not quite exactly the same as the right wing of his party, and he represented those people. He was a politician who was not ashamed to be a politician.
Sid, for you, as a longtime Republican, watching Senator McCain through these years, you know, do you hear what Jerry's saying? Do you agree with Senator McCain? Do you disagree?
Well, whether you agreed or disagreed with him, you had to admire, again, his courage, what he stood up for. And yes, sometimes I didn't agree with some of his views. Sometimes there were conservative views I didn't agree with that he had. However, as I mentioned earlier, he put the people first. It wasn't about the Republicans. It wasn't about the Democrats. He pushed politics aside. I mean, it's interesting, the eulogies, you had President Bush, you had President Obama.
Who he hand-selected while he was still living.
And they were staunch enemies when he was running for president against Bush in the primary and then against Obama's. Staunch enemy, lies were made up, but he stepped back and he actually said, all right, let's work together.
Were you surprised when you heard that the senator had reached out to former President Obama and former President Bush to speak?
Not particularly, because, of course, 30 years ago or even less, that would have been a normal thing to do. Because when we talk about putting politics aside, people are thinking, well, politics means what we see, this party fighting. Well, the thing is that for guys like John McCain, politics is noble. Politics is a partnership. Politics is we're going to fight it out, but we're on the same team at the end of the day. That's what politics used to be more like.
Well, because isn't the point of politics a legislative agenda and getting things done on behalf of the people who elect you?
Correct. And as you mentioned in the past, Jerold, years ago, Reagan, Tip O'Neill, McCain, they would go across the aisle. They wouldn't just tweet. They wouldn't use social media. They would sit face-to-face after hours. They'd talk about the family, they'd talk about old times, and they would hash something out without having to be in the halls of Congress.
Yeah. I wanted to point to something that President Obama said during his eulogy. He said, "We never doubted the other man's sincerity or the other man's patriotism, or that when all was said and done, we were on the same team. We never doubted we were on the same team."
Right, that's the money quote. And because the idea here is that, really it started to erode in the middle to late 80s. By the time Newt Gingrich had sort of changed the way his party operates in Congress, it was a different place. But prior to that, and this is what McCain came into and saw as the ideal, that was a place where there was a consensus on goals. And there was an argument about how to get there. And it wasn't until one party decided, look, we have to fight in a different way. We've got to attack goals and not just, and that obviously made it hard for the two parties to continue to operate in the way that they had. Today, it is not the fault necessarily of a Republican or a Democratic congressman. They're in a system now where if they tried to act the way a John McCain and a Ted Kennedy might have acted, that won't work for them. They are in a way stuck. If you're a Republican, you're going to get primaried if you actually want to make a deal, right? If you're a Democrat, you could be primaried if you want to make a deal.
But then how do we move forward as a country if you're so concerned about, like, to your point, about that being stuck?
I'm so glad it's his term that you said that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, being stuck can mean several things. First, Washington created this mess years ago. This just didn't happen. And with that, we're going to have to bring new people in. We're going to have to, it's up to the voters. It's easy for us to sit here and be pundits and say, this is what happened. But the voters are going to have to start taking responsibility, and we're going to have to start getting new candidates to go to Washington, to go to Beacon Hill, instead of get the career politicians out.
To that point about how we got here, there was a piece in Vox recently that said the following: McCain, who passed away at 81, is remembered as a maverick, a man who crossed the aisle and built relationships with Democrats, but he also betrayed his own values, hoping to win a presidential election, and sent the Republican Party down the path to Trump.
Yeah, well, that's not fair. Now, obviously, he did appoint Sarah Palin, and that's where
Right.
they get
The
that.
gist of the article is looking at
so
Sarah
so the
Palin.
non-serious sort of, but it's not fair because to say that he compromises values in choosing her, is that what the point is? I don't think so. The vice president has no role anyway. At the time, he made a decision that he thought would be useful electorally, and it wouldn't actually have impacted his presidency that much because you can relegate your vice president to whatever obscurity you choose. So that's an unfair criticism of.
And actually, I feel it's like the Democrats actually gave a gift to Trump by having Hillary Clinton run. She was so detached. We may disagree on this, but she didn't listen to her husband. She felt self-entitled. Did she really have a platform? And people were disgusted. Look at the election the other day. Charlie Baker's going to be the next governor. However, there was a contingency out there that felt that he had abandoned the Republican values that he was elected
You mean
for.
the votes that came down for Scott Lively?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, again, this just didn't happen. Trump is in mainly because there wasn't that great of candidate running against him. Plus, there are a lot of people that were fed up with what's going on in Washington. We talked once before about immigration. Both parties have been in power and have had a chance to fix that, but they refuse to. So whose fault is it, the president's or Congress?
We're short on time, so I want to ask one last question. This past week, there was so much talk about this idea of going back to the days of John McCain, the John McCain era of politics. Sure. But in reality, there is no back. You have present and future. So what would each of you say? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's hard to give a prescription, but when collegiality and compromise is good politics and good policy, then the goal is for politics and policy to be compatible, right? Right now, it isn't actually good politics to go after good policy. In other words, everybody is obsessed with a particular vision of policy. They're not willing to compromise on that policy. And you know what? It's not good politics to compromise on policy. Until it is good politics to make policy compromises, we're not going to be able to.
Yeah. It's technically my way or the highway. Each side is not willing to give. And you've got a stalemate, an impasse, and we're going to see this for a few more years at least.